Recruiting has always been built on trust. In today's AI-driven world, that matters more than ever. So, how do you make sure you're using technology to help build trust rather than eroding it? Just keep listening to find out. Support for this podcast comes from Smart Recruiters. Are you looking to supercharge your hiring? Meet Winston, Smart Recruiters' AI-powered companion. I've had a demo of Winston. The capabilities are extremely powerful, and it's been crafted to elevate hiring to a whole new level. This AI sidekick goes beyond the usual assistant, handling all the time-consuming admin work so you can focus on connecting with top talent and making better hiring decisions. From screening candidates to scheduling interviews, Winston manages it all with AI precision, keeping the hiring process fast, smart, and effective. Head over to smartrecruiters.com and see how Winston can deliver superhuman results.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi there, welcome to episode 788 of Recruiting Future with me, Matt Alder. We live in a world where recruiters can connect with thousands of people at the click of a button. LinkedIn, CRMs, AI tools, they all promise to manage relationships at a scale unimaginable a generation ago. The challenge is that genuine trust doesn't scale automatically. When interactions become automated and transactional, the very thing that makes recruiting work starts to break down. People still hire people they trust, and the best referrals still come through relationships rather than algorithms. So, how do you build and maintain trust at scale? My guest this week is Janice Chaffin, founder of Top Source Talent and host of the Talking TA podcast. In our conversation, she shares how nearly 4 decades of recruiting have shaped her thinking on building trust at scale and ensuring that technology strengthens relationships rather than undermining them. Hi, Denise, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Could you quickly introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
All right. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona in the U.S., so a little bit far from you. I have a company called Top Source Talent, and we've had this company now, since 2013, so 13 years this year. And we do recruiting for all sorts of industries. We're very agnostic. But about 3 years ago, I started my own podcast, and thank you for being a guest on my podcast as well.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I call it Talking TA. It's talkingta.com for anybody who wants to see the library. And again, Top Source Talent is my company. I've been recruiting since 1988, which kind of brings up our discussion today about relationship development.
I think this is just such a great topic because so much content on my podcast, it's about AI and automation and all these kind of things. And we talk about, human relationships and the human aspects of things. But I wanted to kind of just really dive into it in a little bit more depth. So, it's an obvious question, but it seems like a good one to start with. How important are human relationships and human networks when it comes to recruiting?
Oh my gosh, it's the core of what we do. And I think that people are overlooking that because they're getting caught up with technology. So they're kind of forgetting the basics of our entire industry. When I started in 1988, I had a Rolodex, and I did a presentation recently on it and talked about, how we've advanced from the Rolodex from 38 years ago to current day. And it's amazing the transition that we've had. But I think along the way, we've kind of stumbled a bit and we've gotten so caught up with technology. Our relationships have become transactional, versus real relationships. I made friends with some of the people, that I developed relationships with early on in my career. And some of those people, became clients, and some of them became, because people's careers advance over the years, right? So people that we connect with when they're still new to career, or maybe a candidate that we just, connected with somehow. Those people advance. They become vice presidents. They become CEOs. They become board members, and they bring you with them, So once you've developed a relationship, generally speaking, especially if you maintain that relationship, it's going to carry you quite far.
Yeah, and I suppose that, thinking back to that time before the internet and before email was sort of widely used in business, which I can remember as well, you had to lean into relationships because there wasn't sort of technology that could do this for you. So there was much more kind of effort had to sort of be put into it. I mean, how does that translate to the digital world that we now live in? What are the parallels? What is it that people could be doing to make sure that they're doing everything they can around the relationships that they have?
Research has consistently shown that 60 to 70% of all of our jobs are filled through networks, not through job postings. So if you think about the networking aspect of relationship building, I recall, in fact, I think we still do to some degree, make connections with people through conferences, through meetings, happy hours. Oftentimes, I've made connections at airports, in airplanes, sitting next to somebody. Developing relationships is something that we do from the time we wake up in the morning till the time we go to bed at night, unless we're stuck at home, And even then, how many relationships now with technology do we develop using LinkedIn, using video conferencing, other meetings that we're on? I know with my podcast, I have the relationships that I'm developing now through the podcast, when I see an article like with yours, I saw one of your postings. I thought, gosh, I need to connect with him. And so here we are, it's quite amazing really when we look at what we did to develop relationships years ago, how we've kind of lost touch with that. But I think we need to lean back into that now and go kind of back to basics, right? And AI can help us, AI can help us with, what we call career relationship management now. And ATS companies are including like CRMs now with their platforms. And so there's a lot we can do with AI, with respect to, keeping us up to date on people's lives. Even LinkedIn will do it. You can tag people on LinkedIn. And then when somebody moves to a new position or they have a change in their life, oftentimes we'll be tagged and reminded. So that kind of stuff is great. That way we are staying in contact with people on a regular basis, and the technology is helping us to do it.
Yeah, and I know that there's kind of various tools out there like Dex and Clay. If people haven't come across these, almost like personal CRMs, they go kind of much deeper than LinkedIn ever can in terms of managing these things. But I think that the thing for me that's really important is what you're describing there is what builds trust. And I think that in an increasing world of just like AI slop and fake things and automation, trust is really important in the hiring process, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It really is, because there's a saying in this lifetime: if we do something good for someone, they'll tell one person. If we do something to piss somebody off, they'll tell 9. So trust is big. And quite truthfully, we're all interconnected. When you have people that you've worked with, I've always said never burn a bridge in this business, because let me tell you, you can't go back across once you've burnt it. And there have been a couple people that I've run into with my own career that have kind of burnt bridges, but at the same time, I don't even hear about them anymore. So I don't think I was the only bridge that they burned. I've tried really hard to maintain trust, with my relationships, because those relationships, they're lifelong. They endure forever. Even people who've retired, I stay in contact with, because those people are still connected to other opportunities, even if it's volunteer or board opportunities. Or there was a woman that contacted me just the other day. It was funny, and she asked me if I'd be a presenter on a panel, and quite truthfully, she was like the last person I would have expected to hear from on something like that. But, she's kind of gotten involved with this company. They're a nonprofit organization. So these relationships, because she trusted me for so many years, we've known each other 20 years, she contacts me, right? Yeah. So, and it's interesting as far as clients go. There was a guy, in fact, that I placed with one of my clients in 2010. And he is now the VP of a new startup company. And we have a meeting actually today to talk about, doing some work for his new company. So, I mean, these relationships, obviously, they continue, they persevere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose what's changed is, again, if we think back to the years before the internet and email, et cetera, there was a limitation to the amount of people you could build a relationship with because you had to meet them face to face or on the phone. And there was time involved in sort of, unearthing people to talk to. And that's kind of disappeared because of how connected everything is. But it, as you say, it means that people are potentially dealing with kind of thousands of connections and building meaningful trust and networks within that is difficult. But as you say, technology can help. And I think in the future, AI will be able to help even more.
Oh my gosh, yes. In fact, there's a fun fact. Most professionals only actively maintain 150 to 200 relationships. It's called the Dunbar's number. But honestly, in our industry, most recruiters, executives, and business developers actually meet, like you said, thousands of people over the course of a career. And it's interesting because now we have, the opportunity to stay connected with more people, like you're saying, than before, but at the same time, I mean, which tools, and that's the part that I think that people kind of get a little bit stuck with. How are we going to stay, connected with these people? There's something called network mapping. I don't know, how familiar you are with it, but it's the future of AI capability. And AI will actually help us, to stay networked, with people in our circle, in our big, growing, huge circle. It's almost like watching a spider web being built, right? It starts out small, it keeps growing, so network mapping has become really big now. In fact, even LinkedIn has something called Talent Insights that helps with network mapping, which is really an awesome way to use technology because then it does keep us connected to more and more people. Not only that, but it helps us to connect to new people through the people that we already know. And you go back on trust, building trust. So when you do build a trust connection, I guess if you would want to call it that, with another person, that person then is also your segue to meeting other people. So again, going back to the whole idea of a web, it is a big web that we're building for ourselves. So I guess we're all spiders in some respects, right?
There was a really unique moment in time where LinkedIn and Facebook hit the mass market. Just everyone was kind of joining them. And we just had this incredible moment where we could suddenly see who people knew in common and reconnect with people that we'd lost connections with over a really long period of time. And I think unless you kind of lived through that, it was very difficult to describe, but it was quite unique. As you say, I think since then we've just kind of got very complacent about being connected to thousands and thousands of people. I think there's been we've relied on algorithms to kind of do this for us. And even with the changes to the LinkedIn algorithm, it's now more about interest than connections. People really need to think about how they can build that trust at scale and the kind of things that they need to say and do to be able to do that, don't they?
Oh, definitely. It's interesting. I went to a conference about, I guess it was 2 years ago. Maybe I was at one of the, it was either Transform or I think it was Unleash, the Unleash conference here in the States. And there was a woman I was speaking with, and I was actually interviewing her for the podcast that we were doing for the event. And she made a comment about, because I asked her, I said, hey, so what's bringing you to this conference? And she said, well, honestly, she goes, I see these conferences now as like the new water cooler. She said, I can come to these conferences and I can meet people from my own company that work in other regions. I can meet people that are vendors. I can meet customers. I can meet peers that I haven't worked with. She goes, it is. And I said, oh, that's a great way to put it, though, the new water cooler. So we have other ways of connecting with people and staying in contact. But to your point, we have evolved. From a long time ago. And there are thousands of people now, and it's hard to maintain a lot more relationships and thousands of relationships where, like I was saying, most people have 150 to 200 relationships that they can maintain. Honestly, if we're expected to use technology to stay connected to thousands of people, how else are we going to do it? So we can use technology, though, to obviously, if we're going to a conference, to reach out to other people, find out if they're going to be there, and make those, in person and face-to-face connections while we are at conferences or events.
I completely agree. And I think that's why, I always like to attend so many face-to-face conferences, because you kind of build trust there. You build, you meet people, you have conversations that you wouldn't have on Zoom, if that makes sense. So I think also, since work has become a lot more remote, meetings have become very functional, haven't they? You kind of have a Zoom meeting with someone, you have a very sort of clear time span and an idea about what you're going to talk about that is different from meeting someone face to face.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of value added to, getting on a plane when you can and meeting people face to face. But yes, I think video conferencing has been a lifesaver, especially since COVID. When COVID started, it kind of pushed us in the direction of more video conferencing and digital connection, which is fine, right? But, when you do have the opportunity, like you said, to meet people face to face, having, I think, a combination, not leaning into one idea or the other, either face to face or digital. I think having a good mixture and a good combination of both is probably the winning solution. And you had mentioned, some of the platforms that are available that, I would call today's current Rolodexes, right? Like Clay and Dex and HubSpot. And again, the ATS platforms that are being revised and updated, to include all of these new AI supported features, right, that are helping. Because I know the ATS that I'm using, has a CRM attached to it. So, and it will tag people for me because there's, what do you call them? The little extensions, right, that you have to other technology. So you have to kind of be careful with it. But once you know what's going to work for your tech stack, you can integrate, other pieces, other tools, to help you stay more on top of, some of the relationships that are important, that that you want to, stay connected with. Because again, this is the heart of our business. Relationships really is the core and the heart of what we do in this business.
Right at the start of the conversation, you mentioned that way back in 1988, this was such a key part of what we do, and that we lost some of the skills around this. We've talked a lot about staying connected and mapping networks and all those kind of things to help us deal with the volume of information and people. But what are those kind of core skills for building relationships that you think there's less focus on that need to come back?
Oh my gosh. One of them, I remember when I first started recruiting, I had a couple of positions that I needed help with. The technology that I was looking for at the time was new. One in particular, I was looking for a CAD designer, computer aided design engineer. And this person needed to have experience with Pro E, that was some sort of a CAD tool. And at the time, there was something called CATIA that was the one that was being used the most. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to find somebody with Pro E? I have no idea. Well, what I did is I contacted a guy that works in sales for Pro E. I said, hey, I think his name was Mike. And I go, hey, Mike, I'm really looking for somebody with this experience, and, Pro E is kind of a new tool. I need to find out, where would I find someone? He said, oh, I can help you out. No problem. He said, there's a couple of companies that started using it, but it didn't work out. He said, and they were acquired by other companies. And so there's these people who are going to be looking for new positions now. He gave me some names, and I thought, oh my gosh, this was super helpful. And I did that again. I kind of repeated that exercise of getting connected with salespeople, because they are kind of the traffic cops, if you will, of any industry. They can kind of tell you who's hiring, who's contracting, who their competitors are. Companies, they can direct you to talent that you need. So I made a point of getting connected with people in sales at the time, because they really were, and not only that, but they were super willing and helpful to give, leads and to give referrals. So they became my Rolodex. Those were some of the, And I remember also the engineers that we were working with. because I was really entrenched in the tech and the semiconductor industries. They would take us with them to their product conferences, to the industry conferences, and introduce us to people. And that was great. So I've always made a habit of collecting business cards. In fact, last year I went to the Semicon West conference here in Phoenix, came back with a huge stack of business cards, and I still use them. I am still somebody who's a big supporter of business cards. Never gotten rid of them. And I think most people feel that way. Here we are with all this technology all these years later, and people are still giving out business cards. So there are other ways of connecting and staying connected besides the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. But finally, what do you think the future is going to look like? How is this all going to pan out? What role are recruiters going to be playing in a few years' time?
I think that we're going to take a few steps back. I think that we'll look at technology, see what's going to work well for us. You know, we all lived through, you and I both lived through the .com era, right? Where we saw this big, huge expansion, you know, once the internet did make its way into our lives. And I think that we'll see the same thing with AI, except it might happen faster. The internet, I think, maybe kind of slow rolled us a little bit, but not too much though, because I didn't have my first email account till 1994. And it was in 2000 that the .com bust happened. But what happens there is, you know, you've got this expansion that happens quickly and rapidly. And then all of a sudden there's a contraction because people are saying, okay, this is what's going to work for me. This is what's going to work for my company. And they find a place where they're comfortable, you know, a tech stack that they can work with, something that is going to help them to bridge, you know, between the technology and the human aspect, because we are putting so much focus right now on the human aspect of our positions, our industry, our connections. So I think that we will kind of be taking a step backwards and reconnecting the way we did 35 years ago with people, but using the technology to help us to be smarter, to help us to connect, or stay connected, you know, in ways that we haven't experienced before. So I think there'll be a kind of a combination of older relationship building skills that we had a long time ago, coupled with the AI technology that can help us to maintain them.
Denise, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
My thanks to Denise. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can search all the past episodes at recruitingfuture.com. On that site, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Recruiting Future Feast, and get the inside track on everything that's coming up on the show. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.
This is my show.